My name is Clara. I'm 30 years old, and I've built a life I never thought would be possible. I grew up in a lower middle-class family where money was always tight and priorities weren't always in the right place. From a young age, I learned that if I wanted something, I'd have to fight for it on my own. I worked hard, got a full scholarship to a prestigious university, graduated with a degree in business administration, and slowly built a stable career. Today, I work as a financial analyst and live in a comfortable apartment that I bought with my own effort. I'm not rich, but I live well. Despite all this, I've always felt like an outsider in my family. Not because I did anything wrong, but because my success seemed to make them uncomfortable. My brother Lucas, my mother Teresa's favorite, was the complete opposite of me. He never managed to hold down a stable job, but he always found a way to be forgiven for his mistakes. My sister Renata, on the other hand, had a special talent for passive-aggressive comments. She'd say things like, "Money doesn't buy happiness, Clara," while readily accepting the money I sent her to help pay her rent. My father, Roberto, was the most apathetic of all. He always sided with my mother and never stood up for me. Even so, I kept trying to stay close to them, thinking that, with enough dedication and sacrifice, I would finally earn my place in a family that never really felt like mine. It was December, and the Christmas lights lit up the front of my grandparents' house, where our family would gather for the holidays. I arrived with gifts for everyone, as I always did, trying to bring some joy to the atmosphere. But deep down, I knew the dinner would be yet another opportunity for Lucas to make jokes at my expense, for Renata to throw some veiled insults, and for my mother to pretend not to notice any of it. Still, I smiled and did my best to participate. Maybe it was the holiday spirit, or perhaps an innocent hope that this time things would be different. During dinner, as everyone sat around the table enjoying the food my grandmother had prepared, I decided to ask about the family gathering that was supposedly planned for the next day. I was excited to see my cousins, aunts, and uncles, since it was rare for all of us to be together. "I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's gathering," I said, trying to sound casual. The silence that followed was almost deafening. For a moment, everyone exchanged glances I couldn't quite interpret. Then Lucas let out a short, mocking laugh. "Gathering? Clara, the meeting was yesterday." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean yesterday? Mom told me it was on the 23rd. Renata, holding her wine glass, smiled maliciously. "Oh, that must have been a mistake." "Oops!" I looked at my mother, searching for an explanation, but all I got was a shrug. "I think I got the dates mixed up," Teresa said, not even bothering to sound apologetic. My eyes turned to Lucas, who seemed to be enjoying the situation. "How strange, huh? They forgot to tell you," he said, smirking. At that moment, my aunt, sitting across the table, pulled out her phone and showed a picture. There they were, my cousins, my uncles, my nephews, my brother, my sister, my mother, and my father, all of them smiling, hugging, in a room decorated with Christmas lights. And me? I hadn't even received a message. I felt a wave of coldness wash over me, but instead of yelling or crying, I simply placed my fork on the plate, stood up, and walked away from the table. "Clara, where are you going?" my mother asked in a falsely sweet tone. "To get some fresh air." I left my grandparents' house and walked to a nearby park. The cold wind hit my face as the Christmas lights shimmered in the trees, creating a painful contrast to the emptiness I felt inside. I sat on a bench and took a deep breath, trying to process what had just happened. They knew. They all knew. That exclusion wasn't a mistake or an oversight. It was intentional. I was the daughter, who paid the bills, who helped when everyone needed it, but when they couldn't get anything out of me, I was simply forgotten. I sat on the park bench for what felt like hours, watching the Christmas lights flicker in the distance. The cold wind bit at my skin, but I didn't care. My thoughts were louder than the world around me. For years, I had tried to convince myself that my family's behavior wasn't personal, that maybe they just didn't know how to express love. I had excused their words, their actions, and their constant disregard for my feelings. But tonight, something broke. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and scrolled through the family group chat. Their messages were still there from the day before, casual and cheerful, talking about the gathering I wasn't invited to. Renata had even posted a picture of the food she brought, with Lucas joking in the comments about how bad it probably tasted. My mother had replied with laughing emojis. I stared at the screen, wondering how I had let things get to this point. How had I become the person who gave so much and received so little in return? A notification popped up. It was from Renata. "Where did you go? Mom says you're being dramatic again. Come back inside and stop making a scene." I stared at the message, feeling a strange mix of anger and clarity. For so long, I'd been the one who always came back, the one who apologized, even when I wasn't wrong, the one who stayed silent to keep the peace. But tonight, I realized something. I didn't owe them anything. I stood up from the bench, my decision made. I wasn't going back inside. I wasn't going to sit at that table and pretend everything was fine. Instead, I walked home. The city. Lights blurred as I made my way through the streets, my mind racing. By the time I reached my apartment, I had a plan. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. For years, I'd been transferring money to my family, helping Lucas pay off his debts, sending Renata money for her rent, covering my parents' unexpected expenses without a second thought. It was automatic, like paying a bill. But tonight, I broke the cycle. One by one, I canceled every automatic transfer. It felt like cutting invisible strings that had been holding me down for years. With each click, I felt lighter, stronger. Next, I opened the family group chat and typed a message. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't hesitate. I won't be coming back tonight, and I won't be sending money anymore. I've spent years supporting all of you, emotionally and financially, and I've gotten nothing but disrespect in return. From now on, I'm prioritizing myself. I hope you understand. I hit send and turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt free. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt or regret. I felt peace. It was as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages. Renata was furious and accused me of being selfish. Lucas called me ungrateful and claimed I was abandoning the family. My mother sent long paragraphs filled with guilt-tripping phrases like, "Family is all we have, Clara." I read each message calmly, but I didn't respond. Their words no longer had power over me. Instead, I went for a run. The cold air stung my face, but I felt alive. As I ran through the city streets, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. For so long, I had been living for them. Now, I was finally living for myself. The morning after I sent the message, I felt a strange mix of liberation and unease. I had finally drawn a line, something I had never dared to do before. But as I sipped my coffee and stared at my phone, still buzzing with notifications from my family, I knew this wasn't the end. They wouldn't let it go so easily. Renata's messages were relentless. "Selfish. That's what you are. After everything Mom and Dad have done for you, this is how you repay them? I hope you enjoy your perfect little life while the rest of us struggle." Lucas, as expected, was angrier. "Wow, Clara. Big shot with her fancy job thinks she's two. Good for her family now. Don't come crying to us when you realize how lonely you are." And my mother, ever the master of guilt, sent voice notes in her soft, almost pleading tone. "Clara, darling, I don't understand why you're doing this. We're a family. Families stick together no matter what. Please, let's talk about this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not because I didn't have words, but because I knew they wouldn't hear me. They never had before, and this time wouldn't be any different. The hours passed, and as the day turned into evening, I found myself reflecting on all the times I had been there for them. The nights I had stayed up helping Lucas figure out his finances after his third failed business. The countless times I had sent Renata money for her rent, only for her to spend it on something frivolous and then come back asking for more. The way I had always dropped everything to help my parents, even when it meant sacrificing my own needs. And what had I gotten in return? Exclusion, mockery, and the constant reminder that no matter how much I gave, I would never truly belong. That evening, my mother called. This time, I decided to answer. "Clara," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you doing this? We're your family. We love you." I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I've been giving and giving for years, and all I get in return is disrespect. I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter unless I'm helping everyone else." She was silent for a moment, then said, "You're being dramatic. You know we appreciate you." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Do you? Because it didn't feel that way when you all had a family gathering and didn't even bother to tell me. Was that appreciation?" "That was a mistake," she said quickly. "I told you, I got the dates mixed up." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "It wasn't a mistake. You didn't forget. You just didn't care enough to include me." Her tone shifted, becoming defensive. "I don't know what you want from us, Clara. We've always done the best we could." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You've always done the best you could for Lucas and Renata. But when it comes to me, the only thing you've ever expected is that I give without asking for anything in return." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I'm done, Mom," I continued. "I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I am setting boundaries. I'm not going to keep sacrificing my happiness for people who don't value me." She sighed heavily. "I hope you know what you're doing, Clara." "I do," I said simply. "For the first time, I really do." After we hung up, I felt lighter. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. That night, I sat on my couch with a journal in my lap. I started writing down all the things I wanted for myself, things I had put on hold for years because I was too busy taking care of everyone else. I wrote about the trips I wanted to take, the hobbies I wanted to explore, the kind of relationships I wanted to nurture. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream without guilt, to imagine a life where I didn't have to apologize for putting myself first. And as I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days following my conversation with my mother were quiet. I hadn't responded to Renata's passive-aggressive texts or Lucas's angry outbursts. My mother, after our call, hadn't reached out again. For the first time in years, my life felt like it was no longer tethered to their constant demands. At first, the silence felt strange. It wasn't just the absence of their voices. It was the absence of the guilt, the weight I had carried for so long. I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I had spent so much time worrying about their needs, their problems, and their expectations, that I had forgotten how to focus on my own. But slowly, I began to rediscover what I had been missing. I started with small things. Each morning, I would wake up early and go for a run through the park near my apartment. The fresh air, the sound of birds chirping, and the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement became a kind of therapy. On weekends, I'd spend hours in my favorite bookstore, picking up novels I had always wanted to read but never had the time. 4. I also signed up for a painting class. It was something I used to love in my teenage years, but as life became more demanding, I had abandoned it. Now, standing in front of a blank canvas with a palette of colors in hand, I felt a spark of joy that had been buried for far too long. At work, I threw myself into my projects. For years, I had worked hard to provide for my family, but now, I was working for myself. I took on new challenges, impressed my colleagues, and even began considering a promotion that I had previously turned down because I didn't think I could handle the extra responsibility. But the most profound change was in how I viewed relationships. I started spending more time with my friends. They had always been there, patiently waiting for me to see that I didn't need to rely on my family for a sense of belonging. My best friend Anna was especially supportive. One evening, as we sat in a small cafe, she said something that stayed with me. "Clara, family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who respect you, who see you for who you are, and who choose to stand by you. That's what you deserve." Her words hit me hard. For so long, I had tried to mold myself into someone my family would respect and love. But now I realized that the love I deserved wasn't something I needed to earn. It was something that should have been given freely. One evening, as I was organizing my apartment, I came across an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I found pictures of my family from years ago. Birthdays, holidays, vacations, moments that, at the time, had felt happy. But as I looked closer, I saw the cracks I had ignored. The forced smiles, the subtle exclusions, the way I always seemed to be on the edges of the frame, both literally and figuratively. I closed the album and put it away, not out of anger, but out of acceptance. That chapter of my life was over. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, I felt more like myself. I wasn't the person who lived only to please others anymore. I was someone who had learned to prioritize her own happiness, her own dreams, and her own worth. One afternoon, I received a message from Lucas. It was short and blunt. "So, you're just going to ignore us forever?" I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "No, but I'm also not going back to the way things were. If you want to have a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect. I'm not here to fix your problems or carry your burdens anymore. That's my boundary." He didn't reply, and that was okay. Later that evening, while walking home from my painting class, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and for the first time, they didn't feel like a reminder of everything I was missing. They felt like a promise of everything that lay ahead. I had lost something when I stepped away from my family, but I had gained so much more. I had gained myself. Months had passed since I set boundaries with my family, and while I had found peace in my decision, I knew the story wasn't over. The silence from them wasn't acceptance. It was waiting. That moment came one evening when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I checked through the peephole, I saw Lucas standing there, his expression unreadable. I hesitated for a moment, but I knew I couldn't avoid the confrontation forever. I opened the door. "What do you want, Lucas?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. He stepped inside without an invitation, his usual sense of entitlement leading the way. He looked around my apartment as if inspecting it before turning to face me. "This is ridiculous, Clara," he said. "You can't just cut us off like this." "I didn't cut anyone off, Lucas," I replied firmly. "I set boundaries. There's a difference." He laughed, but it was sharp and humorless. "Boundaries? What does that even mean? We're your family. You don't get to have boundaries with your family." I crossed my arms and met his gaze. "It means I'm done being treated like a resource instead of a person. It means I'm not going to fix your problems or pay your bills anymore." His face twisted with frustration. "You've changed. You used to care about us. Now you're just another selfish, stuck-up person who thinks they're too good for their family." I felt the familiar sting of his words, but this time, I didn't let them take root. "No, Lucas, I still care about you, but I finally realized that I can care about you without sacrificing myself in the process. That's not selfish. That's healthy." He shook his head and paced around the room, his voice rising. "Do you even know what Mom's been going through? What Renata's dealing with? They're struggling, Clara, and you just abandoned them." "I didn't abandon anyone," I said, my voice steady. "I gave more than enough for years, and all I got in return was disrespect. You don't get to guilt me into going back to that." He stopped pacing and stared at me, his frustration giving way to something softer, something almost vulnerable. "You don't get it, Clara. You've always been the strong one, the one who had it all together. We needed you." "And that's exactly the problem," I said, taking a step closer to him. "You needed me, but you never thought about what I needed. You took, and I let you, because I thought that's what family was supposed to do. But I can't do it anymore. Lucas, I won't." For a moment, he didn't say anything. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the realization starting to dawn on him. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "You're just done with us?" "No," I said softly. "I'm not done with you, but I'm done with being taken for granted. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be on equal terms. I can't carry you anymore." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know if I can do that, Clara. That's your choice," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But I'm not going back to the way things were." Lucas left shortly after, and as I closed the door behind him, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, because I knew our relationship might never be the same. Relief, because I had finally stood my ground. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for validation from anyone. I wasn't replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I had said the wrong thing or hurt someone unintentionally. I knew I had done the right thing, for myself. The next day, I received a message from my mother. It was short and direct. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a moment before typing my response. "I'm willing to talk, but only if you're ready to listen. I'm not going to argue or defend my choices anymore." She didn't reply right away, and I didn't expect her to. For the first time, I wasn't chasing after their approval. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening working on a painting I had started days ago. It was a landscape, bright, colorful, full of life. As I added the finishing touches, I realized that it was a reflection of how I felt inside, whole, vibrant, and free. Months had passed since Lucas showed up at my door, and though my family's attempts to reach out had dwindled, the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the back of my mind. I had spent so long defining myself through my relationship with them, through their approval, their needs, their crises, that it was strange to live without that constant pull. Strange, but liberating. One afternoon, as I sat in my apartment, finishing a painting, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. "I'm ready to listen. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to preserve the peace I had worked so hard to build. But another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, felt that this was a step forward. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe the next day. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a table near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked up as I approached, and for the first time in a long time, her expression wasn't one of reproach or disappointment. It was softer, almost hesitant. "Hi, Mom," I said, sitting across from her. "Hi, Clara," she replied, her voice quiet. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The noise of the cafe filled the silence between us, the clinking of cups, the hum of conversation, the hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, she spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we treated you," she began. "And I realize now that you were right. We took you for granted. I took you for granted." Her words caught me off guard. My mother wasn't someone who apologized easily, and hearing her admit this felt both shocking and strangely healing. "I'm sorry, Clara," she continued, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm sorry for all the times I didn't see you, for all the times I let Lucas and Renata treat you the way they did. I thought you didn't need anything from us because you were so strong. But I see now that I was wrong." I let her words sink in, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you," I said finally. "It means a lot to hear you say that. But it's not just about the past, Mom. It's about what happens moving forward. I need to know that things will be different." She nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can fix everything, Clara, but I want to try. I want to have a better relationship with you." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. "I want that too," I said. We talked for a while longer, not just about the past, but about the future. She told me about the changes she was trying to make, and I shared with her the things I had been doing for myself, the painting, the running, the small joys I had rediscovered. When we parted ways, I didn't feel like everything was magically fixed, but I felt like there was a path forward, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, there were more conversations, more small steps toward healing. Lucas and Renata didn't reach out, and I didn't push them to. I knew that their journey, if they even chose to take one, was their own. But my relationship with my mother slowly began to change. She started asking about me, truly listening, when I spoke. She even came to one of my painting exhibitions, something I never thought she would do. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I thought about how far I had come. I had learned to set boundaries, to prioritize myself, and to let go of the guilt that had weighed me down for so long. My family wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but I had built something better for myself, a life where I was no longer defined by their expectations or their approval. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it, because in choosing myself, I had found something I thought I had lost forever: peace. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.